Serial sexual abuse of boys as young as 13, routine bullying, harassment and intimidation, more than 1,000 cases, and a culture of impunity that allowed it to continue for decades. These are some of the horrific findings of a report into decades of systemic abuse within the Australian Defence Force. The report was completed and handed to the Defence Minister months ago. In March, he released only redacted extracts from the executive summary. Now, using freedom of information, 7:30 has obtained the full executive summary, and its contents will shock you. Political editor Chris Ullman has this exclusive report.
The Defence Force has earned a reputation as one of the most respected institutions in Australia. But for decades, it's battled a mostly secret internal war against persistent claims of sexual and physical abuse. Those deep wounds were opened very publicly last year.
It was like my whole world just came crashing down around me.
An 18-year-old officer cadet at the Australian Defence Force Academy, known only as Kate, said a colleague had filmed them having sex and broadcast it on Skype to a group of cadets watching in a room nearby.
There was stills taken on phones, and those were then shown and distributed to various other people.
Kate's story unleashed a deluge of complaint.
Emails, phone calls, faxes.
The Defence Minister's office was inundated with allegations of abuse, so he launched an investigation.
We need to very carefully, exhaustively and methodically deal with all of those complaints.
And hundreds of stories spanning 60 years poured into the review held by law firm DLA Piper, from acts of ritual bastardisation to horrifying tales of brutal sexual assault.
He took me back to his room, made me take off my clothes and then penetrated me.
John was one of the 847 people who lodged a complaint.
In 1988, I was in the Air Force and based in Victoria. I was raped by a 50-year-old corporal. He also raped and sexually abused other minors in the Air Force at the time. There was an investigation. I was a whistleblower regarding the incidents, many incidents. It then came to the knowledge of the commanding officers, which I already knew about, and he was discharged, and consequently I was 18 at the time. They also wanted me discharged as well.
John's story is eerily similar to others told to the investigators, but when the review was released in March this year, it was heavily censored. Only 10 pages of the executive summary were made public.
In October last year, I received from DLA Piper Volume 1 of their report. And today I'm releasing extracts from that in a redacted version, following on from advice of the legal team at DLA Piper and the Secretary of the Department of Defence.
7:30 now has the entire 25-page summary of the report. It makes shocking reading. The edited version had a single line which noted the earliest reported abuse was in 1951 on a 13-year-old boy. But the full story is much more disturbing. Abuse of children was not isolated in defence in place or time. It was widespread.
It is certain that many boys were subjected to serious sexual and physical assault and other serious abuse while they were in the ADF from the 1950s through to the 1970s and possibly into the 1980s.
The Navy recruited 13-year-olds until the late 60s or early 70s, and until the 1980s, all three services recruited boys as young as 15. In that time, the report says,
the ADF and successive Australian governments failed to put in place adequate protections to take into account the special needs and vulnerability of boys of 13, 14, 15 and 16 years of age to protect them from other boys and from adults in the ADF.
A number of inquiries with young boys, young apprentices, 13, 14, 15, over a long period of time.
Victims were often drawn into the abuse.
Many of the boys who suffered such abuse later participated in inflicting similar abuse on other children in the ADF.
The review also received complaints from men and women who'd been recruited as young adults, 17 to 20 years of age, finding
it is certain that many young males and females have been subjected to serious sexual and physical assault and other serious abuse while they were in the ADF from the 1950s at least into the 21st century.
The review finds defence and governments failed to protect the young adults, and again that some of the men went on to become abusers. It cites the former junior recruit training base in Fremantle, HMAS Lewin, as one of the worst incubators of abuse in the late 1960s and early 70s. And of a chapter in the review that's still secret, it says,
the examples selected are horrific because they give an indication of the sort of abuse that occurred.
What happened at HMAS Lewin is no secret to Barry Heffernan of the Vietnam Veterans Association.
I mean, HMAS Lewin was a common denominator there, and they had the various levels of peer pressure, and you started off at the bottom, and you wore it, and then we found that there are blokes who well, they were victims, so they decided to victimise somebody else. You know, I guess it's the law of the jungle, isn't it? You know, it's like that. And to young kids who are naive off the streets, 15 years old, and what do? They fear for their lives. I mean, you know, what a hell of a way to live a life and begin life like that.
Many of the boys, young men and women who were abused went on to suffer lifelong torment.
Past 25 years, basically I've been in institutions, in out of hospitals, psychiatric wards. Hard to trust people, relationships, never been married. Really haven't had a job in 25 years.
Lawyer Brian Briggs acts for many of the victims. He isn't surprised by the review's findings.
It acknowledges that there's been a failure in the duty of care. There's definitely, over a long period of time, historical abuse cases, 4 or 5 inquiries in the past. Sure, there's been a breach of the duty of care that was owed to these young members and service personnel.
The report finds that abuse persisted in defence despite multiple reports and attempts to end it. So it tries to identify the risks in military culture that give rise to it.
No adverse consequences for abusive behaviour, a culture discouraging reporting of abuse, and the chain of command structure in defence lends itself to superiors abusing juniors with impunity.
I know one girl who was raped, and she told her CO about it, and he just said, well, that's basically the way it goes, Dales. And she's worn that ever since and turned to alcohol and all the rest of it.
There appears to have been no appetite in defence to prosecute abusers.
Defence records show very little evidence that perpetrators had been called to account.
And perhaps most disturbing of all,
there is a risk that those perpetrators now hold middle and senior management positions within the ADF, and there is a risk that those who witnessed abuse and did not report what they witnessed now hold middle and senior management positions within the ADF.
But Brian Briggs believes there is little likelihood that anyone will be held to account.
I don't think that they could go back, although a lot of the inquiries and the complainants that I saw could name names, and there were people that went on to become senior officers that were the perpetrators. Whether they're held to accountable, it'd have to involve either criminal proceedings, and you're talking, you know, years and years and years that have gone by. So I don't think that prosecutions would be too interested in taking people to task.
There was some hope that this review would make a difference, but it's fading.
It's not in the hope of getting a bag full of money. It's just somebody to take notice of us and maybe, you know, ask us, you know, if there's anything they can do to help us, but that doesn't seem the case right now.
John hasn't even been told if his submission has been deemed credible.
Well, I think if it is a plausible claim, as they say, 775 people, they should be notified instead of basically sitting back and worrying and stressing more, because it's bringing up the past, not just for myself, but for a lot of other people. And just get everything out in the open. Don't keep hiding things.
And it's important to remember that while there's a long and unsettling history of abuse in defence, some of the claims of physical and sexual assault are current.
Continuing, even today, on my desk I've got an inquiry, a member in the Army, currently serving, subjected to abuse, bullying, harassment. It's going on. I've got inquiries as recent as today, going back days, weeks, it's still going on.
And John fears there's little hope of real change in defence.
I'd only believe it if it actually happened to the minister himself, if he had a son or a daughter and they were in the Defence Forces. Then something might change.
That report from Chris Ullman was produced by Nikki Tugwell, and joining me now in Canberra to respond to these allegations is the Defence Minister, Stephen Smith. Minister, why did you censor the sections of this report that outline the certain abuse of many young people, as well as the likelihood that the alleged perpetrators may remain in ranking positions in the ADF?
Well, a number of things. I received hundreds of complaints or allegations in the aftermath of the ADFA Skype issue, which your report indicated. I initiated a process which saw those allegations and more subject to independent review. I received the first phase of advice to me from DLA Piper in October of last year. I released some of that material in, from memory, April of this year. At every step in the process I've underlined the seriousness of these issues and at every stage have not, for example, discounted the possibility of a Royal Commission. So I've treated these things very seriously from the first moment.
But why did you not release this specific material that we have seen tonight?
Well, I released enough material to make the point that these were very serious allegations, these were very concerning matters. They had to be dealt with methodically, assiduously and carefully. And that's what we are doing.
But what made you hold back these most serious aspects of the report?
Well, more importantly, in the middle of April this year, less than 2 months ago, I received the second phase of DLA Piper's work, which included very many more allegations and updated its report and its advice to me. So I've been working off that report for a couple of months. I don't think that I and the government are too far away from making decisions on this matter and making those decisions public. And also, I don't discount the prospect that further information will be put into the public domain.
But by keeping this particular material secret until we FOI'd it, have you given rise to the perception that you're part of a cover-up?
Well, absolutely not. And the material that's been provided to the ABC has been done by the independent, impartial, objective, freedom of information decision maker. The material was provided to you in the middle of this month because the FOI decision maker regarded this material as material which the government was considering. And so the ABC didn't get immediate access to those materials. But the materials I released...
Why did you not consider this material? I really would like an answer to this question. On what basis did you decide that releasing this material was not in the public interest?
Well, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, that I had released into the public domain more than enough material and commentary to make the point that of the hundreds of allegations which I and others had received, that there were in around about 1,000 cases or 1,000 allegations. On the advice I've got, over 700 plausible allegations. I'd made that point repeatedly. I've never discounted the notion of further legal or judicial investigation, including a Royal Commission.
Okay, all right.
I had released sufficient materials to underline the seriousness of that, and
okay,
the further material
that's... So let's move on. You've made those points. Well, as we've heard in
let me make another point.
Only if you're going to answer the question.
The materials released today simply serve to further underline the seriousness of the matters that I've been dealing with for some considerable time.
Okay, let's go to the seriousness.
Don't discount that more materials will be released into the future.
Okay, let's go to the seriousness of these matters. As we've heard in Chris's story, the report says there's a risk that the perpetrators of this abuse now hold senior and middle management positions within the ADF, as do people who've witnessed abuse and did nothing. You've had that information since last October. Do you know today who those people are?
Well, of course not. There is a risk that that is the case. There's a possibility that that's the case. But why we are proceeding methodically and carefully with this at two levels is these are, as the papers that have been made public make clear, these are still untested allegations.
But right now, are there
yes,
investigations going on to find out who these people are who are still potentially in the ADF?
Well, firstly, these are untested allegations, and the DLA Piper report makes that clear.
It says actually that it's certain that many boys and young people were abused.
It says that there are 700 or more plausible allegations. That's the first point. If you want to get down to individual allegations to determine whether people are still in the system who may be the subject of those allegations, you've got to go through a proper fair process, a fair procedure process to enable people against whom allegations have been made to respond to those allegations. So we have not got down to that detail. We have to do two things. Firstly, to respond to the systemic challenges and the cultural challenges that these allegations have thrown up. And secondly, to make sure that what are described as over 700 plausible allegations over a 50-year or more period are dealt with and investigated and assessed. Now, that is complex and complicated. It can't be done overnight, and it can't be done as a job lot.
I understand that, but let me put to you that the report notes that if those perpetrators are still in the ADF, they may constitute a continuing risk to the safety and well-being of other ADF personnel, and they may constitute a risk to the reputation and operational effectiveness of the ADF. So every day that goes by is critical, wouldn't you say?
Well, and when I released the materials which underline the seriousness of all these allegations, I did it from memory at the same time as the Chief of the Defence Force and the Secretary of the Defence Force released the so-called Pathway to Change document, which sets out the changes needed in Defence's approach to cultural change. You might recall in the aftermath of ADFA, I initiated not just this inquiry with DLA Piper, but a half a dozen cultural inquiries from women in ADFA done by the Sex Discrimination Commission to the use of alcohol and the like. And the Defence response to that, authored by the Chief of the Defence Force and the Secretary of the Defence Force, the Pathway to Change document, acknowledges openly, and I've tabled this in the Parliament, that in the past there has been the turning of a blind eye. In the past, appropriate standards have not been met. In the past, there has been a culture of not reporting, and the Chief of the Defence Force and the Secretary, through that Pathway to Change document, make it crystal clear that that has to change. There's a zero tolerance for inappropriate behaviour and a zero tolerance.
If there is a zero tolerance, then why are you, as Minister, not making it an absolute top priority to find out who these people are potentially still in the Defence Force who are the perpetrators of this culture and this abuse?
Well, firstly, there are untested allegations which need to be tested. Secondly, what I am doing is to make sure that the government's response to this matter, that Defence's response to this matter does two things. That we have systemic change to make sure we've got zero tolerance, no more turning of a blind eye, making sure that there is a culture of encouraging people to report so that these things don't occur again. But secondly, that people who are either the victims of the perpetration of these alleged deeds and the people against whom allegations have been made have got a fair opportunity to put their point of view. So you can't assume...
How are you going to get to the bottom of that without something like a Royal Commission that has powers to compel people to appear and is fully independent of defence?
Well, now you are essentially agreeing with the point that I've been trying to make to you for some time during this interview, which is with over 700 so-called plausible allegations not yet tested that span over a 50 to 60 year period, it is not a one-job lot solution. It's complex, it's complicated. I don't discount a Royal Commission. Nothing more could underline the serious way in which my colleagues and I have been dealing with this matter than by me saying from day one, I don't discount a Royal Commission. I'm not talking it up, but that may be the most effective way of dealing with these matters. There are other possibilities as well, which the report outlines and which I encourage the report to make to me in terms of a vast array of possibilities, including further legal work, including a reconciliation panel, including a compensation claim system and the like. But nothing could underline more the seriousness with which we're taking these allegations in a process that I initiated than by me repeatedly refusing to rule out a Royal Commission to deal with this matter.
OK, Minister, thank you very much for making the time to speak to us on this tonight.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks very much.